I'm joined now by James Baker, who served the Reagan White House, of course, as Chief of Staff, later as Treasury Secretary, and knew Nancy Reagan well. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being with us. First, our condolences to you. You were very close to her, and I know you and Tom Brokaw both spoke to her as recently as February 6th on Tom's and Ronald Reagan's shared birthday.
That's right. Yeah, we did. We had a very good conversation with her, actually, Andre, and I was supposed to see her this week in L.A. I make it a practice of seeing her whenever I go out there, and I go out there 2 or 3 times a year. I knew that she was failing physically, by the way, not mentally. She still had very much had her marbles, but it's a real loss. And of course, your lead-in to the program said it better than I could. Theirs was an extremely exceptional love story, and as Ron said in that little clip you just did, I don't think she was absolutely indispensable to Ronald Reagan's success, and I don't think there would have been a Ronald Reagan as we knew him without Nancy Reagan.
Which is not to understate his effectiveness and his importance, but it was that, in a way, he was guileless. He did not really have the political antennae that she had. And
That's
she
right.
was always looking out for him, for his best interests, and for those who did not have his best interests at heart.
That's right. She was his closest advisor, as a matter of fact, but she was, more than that, she was his constant protector. And she protected him particularly with respect to staff and those on the staff who might want to paddle their own canoe instead of furthering the president's interests. She was 50%, Andrea, you know, because you covered that White House. She was 50% of a team that restored America's pride and confidence in itself after the Carter years, and then reinvigorated America's place in the world.
I think of her also in terms of foreign policy, and you, as a future Secretary of State, and then as Chief of Staff and Treasury Secretary, you saw all of this up close.
Right.
In those days, we were in the middle of the Cold War, and as the president said famously, 3 Soviet leaders, as he said, that he couldn't meet with them because they kept dying on him, you know, Gorbachev, Andropov, Chernenko. Now you had Mikhail Gorbachev, a man in his 50s, decades younger than the previous Soviet leaders, and she saw the possibility, and this was going up against a lot of hardliners, including the Secretary of Defense at the time, wanted him to explore the possibility of negotiations, and that led to the historic November 1985 Geneva summit, the first summit, and then the Gorbachev state dinner. And I speak of this because the orchestration of that, bringing in Van Cliburn, and we see the pictures there of Van Cliburn playing Moscow Nights. He was celebrated in Moscow because he was the only American who had ever won the famed Tchaikovsky Prize as a protege. And he played this folk song, and then you have Gorbachev and Raisa Gorbachev singing along with them, and that was a breakthrough moment. She understood how diplomacy could also be done around the state dinner table.
That's right, she did. And of course, they had many, many state dinners, and they were very effective in furthering America's interests around the world. But she was one of those who encouraged him to sit down and negotiate arms control, talk with the Soviets, and not just say, okay, we're gonna continue to fight this Cold War for another 40 years. And of course, the Cold War actually ended on his successor's watch, but everybody would agree that Ronald Reagan, and as a matter of fact, frankly, most all American presidents before Ronald Reagan were steadfast in their opposition to Soviet expansion, so they all get a little bit of credit for the end of the Cold War and the victorious end of the Cold War, but Ronald Reagan gets a huge amount of that credit as well.
How important was her relationship with her relationship, I should say, with Maggie Thatcher?
Well, it was very important. President Reagan and Prime Minister Thatcher spoke for each other in international meetings. He oftentimes let Margaret Thatcher speak for the two of them. And then on occasions, of course, he would speak for the two of them as the leader of the alliance. But he and Margaret Thatcher were soulmates, and they were very, very close to each other and close personal friends.
She was criticized by some for being overprotective. In looking back now and learning how close he came to dying after the assassination attempt in 1981, that really was an outgrowth of the fear that she felt every day that something would happen to him after that, wasn't it?
Well, that's correct. She was fearful of that, and I was with her at the hospital during right after the shooting, and she was very, very understandably shaken up. She spent some time in the chapel there praying, and of course, President Reagan came a lot closer to death than we knew at the time, but it was not as a result of the actual shooting. It was a result of an infection that occurred during the course of his recovery. That was not well known at the time, but Nancy knew about it, and she was very, very concerned. But she was protective. She had been protective of him before, but she became even more protective of him after that.
And his ability to compromise. I remember him once saying after agreeing to a tax bill that the sound that we heard was the sound of concrete cracking around his feet. You were the head of legislative strategy when you were in the White House. You met twice a day, I think, when you were chief of staff. All those compromises and the meetings with Tip O'Neill, what was he saying, and what was his mantra about that?
Well,
in sharp contrast, I should say, to some of the Republican candidates right now.
What I don't understand about some of the things that's going on today, a lot of people get up there and they beat their chest and say, I'm going to be like Ronald Reagan, I'm not going to talk to the enemy. Well, Ronald Reagan, while he was very, very conservative and he held his principles very deeply and viscerally, he was at heart, he understood that we judge our presidents on the basis of what they can get through the Congress, and he was quite prepared to compromise if necessary in order to get what he wanted accomplished. I can't tell you how many times I'd be sitting there in the Oval with him, just the two of us, and we'd be talking about some question up on the Hill, some piece of legislation. He'd say, Jim, I'd rather get 80% of what I want than go over the cliff with my flag flying. He was actually pretty pragmatic. He was a principled pragmatist. He would never compromise his core beliefs. But if he needed to shave here or there at the margins in order to get something accomplished, he was quite prepared to do it. And I think that's one of the things, Andrea, that accounts for the fact that his two-term presidency was seen to be as successful as it was.